food shed. Martha and I helped start the Building Farmers program that continues to go on in this region. And we'll be partnering with the food shed. And then I'm on the state's Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council.
My name is Elizabeth Mosier, and I have a company called Loco Food Distribution, and we distribute locally grown and made foods to wholesale buyers between Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, and kind of generally around the state, depending on blah, 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 but that's what I do.
On beverages. No, we're
A
getting
lot of
beverages.
it.
And Elizabeth, what was your name of your organization?
Loco Food Distribution, as in crazy.
Okay.
I'm Clyde Wood. I am Vice President of Development for McWhinney. I don't really touch food and agriculture yet, but we did recently acquire the Foothills Mall, which we will be embarking on a major kind of visioning process to reimagine that mall. And I think a big component, maybe which is why John reached out, is a big food and beverage program that is very heavily focused on locally sourced food products and stuff like that.
Cool. My name is Beth Conry. I own B Squared Apiaries, yet another birthday representative on the Ag Advisory Board. Yeah, so we run about 120 colonies between Denver and Wellington, and then I sit on the advisory board for Larimer County. So I appreciate everyone's accepting the invitation and coming this evening and for this valuable. Thank you.
My name is Ashley Kirkovich. I'm the owner and publisher of Edible Magazine, and we are really a publication dedicated to telling local food stories. So we want to be a voice for all of you here in this room. Prior to that, I also worked in food marketing. I was with Diamond Ranch for 12 years. So I did a lot of marketing with them, worked with labels and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, that's what happening.
I'm Martha Solons. I'm with Colorado State University Extension, member of Cougar Valley Community Farms. Also have worked with Dawn for years on our Colorado program. So I provide a lot of technical assistance in the region around the state. And thank you very much for it.
And help develop a really good website called CO Farm to Market, where for every product, every part of the state, you can find navigate the regulatory maze of how to go to market.
Yes.
I love that.
Great asset.
What's it
I
called?
love that. It's called CO Farm to Market.
CO Farm to Market. Okay.
I'm Zach Thode. I'm the chair of the Ag Advisory Board. We'll let John Falls introduce a little bit here in a second, but we've been struggling with this project for a long time, and we're really excited that you guys can provide some input because there's so many ideas and we can't quite get our hands around a good direction. And I think with a group of conversations here in the next couple of weeks, I think we can really get somewhere. I just want to add some context to this. We spent a lot of time with 2 years ago working with Natalie Yoder, who most of you are familiar with, and pretty much told the county the problem exists that we are not keeping very much food in the county. And so that's where we started this. And they came back to us and said, the county commissioners came back to us and said, well, what are we going to do about it? Thank you guys for telling us that we have a problem. Now, what are we going to do about it? And they want us at our deliverable to the county commissioners by Q1 of 2022 is to give them policy recommendations to create opportunity for getting that problem solved. And so we are at a blank slate. Let's go to them and say, do we need to reduce some regulations? Do we need to opportunities? What do we need to do? So that's what we're at here today. I'm a rancher in Livermore, so I try to weigh down all these birthing folks with somebody from the north part of the county. I run a bunch of cows. I farm a bunch of the ground. I grow crops that sometimes make money and sometimes don't make money. And I'm an ag engineer. I do a lot of water engineering around the state and the Colorado and the county. And I've been on the Ag Advisory Board for way too many years. But that's the story. So I appreciate all you guys providing any info we can. This is a great opportunity to steer the direction for the next 20 years. So
All right, we're going to finish the intros with the folks online, but I'm going to let Commissioner John Cafalas speak first because I know he's got another meeting to get to. So let's say hi to Commissioner Cafalas.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Zach, and everyone. I can't turn on my video, though. It says the host has stopped it, so you'll just have to look at my name.
I'm the hostess with the mostest. I don't know what's going on.
You've got a lot of power, Matt. Thank you. So I'll be very brief. My name is John Kafalis. I'm the commissioner from District 1. I'm also the commissioner liaison with the Ag Advisory Board. I appreciate all the hard work that I've observed over the last couple of years since I've been on the Board of County Commissioners. This issue of how do we strengthen, enhance our local food systems on the supply and demand side is a really, really critical issue. And I want to reinforce the statement that Zach made is that, the recommendations that the Ag Advisory Board provides to us will be very helpful next year in the first couple of quarters to make some decisions about how to move forward. So I'm going to be on till 6 o'clock when I have a community conversation. And in the meantime, I just appreciate you all for being here and look forward to your ideas. One other thing that I will add is recently we were approached by Powerhouse 2. They bought the property across from where the Energy Institute is currently. And one of the ideas that's being discussed is having our farmers market, the Larimer County Farmers Market there. So that might create some new opportunities. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah.
Guys, real quick, I'm Matt Lafferty. I'm the principal planner at Long Range Planning here, liaison to the Ag Board. Would you mind? There's only 5 attendees on, so I think that we could probably promote them to panelists.
Yeah.
I just ask that anybody online that wants to speak use their raise hand function so that we don't have a bunch of confusion on who's talking. So I'm going to promote everybody to panelists. And everybody will be able to speak that's online, and we'll just call them by name.
All right, so Hayden, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I've done me yourself.
Or Natasha, you look like you're ready. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, I'll come to
Yeah,
you.
underneath. There you go.
Perfect. Yeah, I think I can't share video, but I'm can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Lloyd. I'm one of the co-founders of Recovery. We are trying to address the barrier that exists between local consumers and local suppliers. So we're trying to make it more convenient for consumers to buy local food and more convenient for local suppliers to sell into the local market. We are developing a marketplace, and we will be launching our first trial of this, which will be in a renovated shipping container in downtown Fort Collins. And we're pushing to open in April 2022. So I'm excited to be here and continue being a part of this local food conversation.
Thanks, Natasha. All right, Hayden, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Hayden Christensen. I run Colorado Fresh Farms. We grow vegetables and do some distribution of Western Slope fruit.
Fantastic. Jean Carpenter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Unmute. Sure. I'm Jean Carpenter. I've been working with my son Griffin with Carpenter Crops. We mainly just do pretty intensive, what I would call mini farming on our property near the Waverly turnoff. And we've been growing food just for distribution to individuals that are needing food. And that's what we do. And we farm about 1 acre.
All right, Lucinda, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, this is Lucinda Womack. I own Hazeldale Mushroom Farm with my husband, Jared Sugar, and we grow organic exotic mushrooms.
Karen Crumbaker, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everybody. This is Karen Crumbaker. I'm with Colorado State University, Larimer County Extension. I'm really thrilled to see everybody who's in the room and online attending this.
All right, now Becca, would you mind introducing yourself, and then can you introduce Karen?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm sorry not to be with you in person today, but John got to choose and he chose the better Jablonski. So I'm on childcare tonight. But I am a professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics with Don Bilmany, and I work very closely with Martha Sellens, who's also in the room. I'm also working now to establish a Food Systems Institute at CSU. But I have had a lot of fun in helping to do a little bit of the planning for tonight. And one of the things that I thought would be wonderful would be to get a little bit of a national perspective on some of the things that other counties are doing in this space. And I asked around a number of colleagues that I really respect. When I talked to folks, Karen's name came up many, many times. So I'm going to introduce Karen Basarab. She has a ton of experience working with different food policy councils and coalitions across the country. And she'll talk a little bit more about how she defines that, because I think sometimes people hear that and they think of a really formal council structure, but that's really not just what she does. And so I think it's really relevant for this group. So Karen is a senior program officer with the Food, Communities, and Public Health Program at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. So it's quite late where Karen is. So thanks again to Karen for taking this time to be with us. She spends most of her time at the Center for a Livable Future on the food policy networks projects, working to build the capacity of food policy councils and similar organizations to effectively engage in food systems policy change. Karen has a master's degree in community and regional planning and public policy and has worked for over a decade on food systems programs and policies. And so with that, thank you so much, Karen, for being willing to talk to us tonight, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Becca. It sounds like you're cooking dinner there too.
Yeah, I have a little helper cooking dinner. It's very conducive to speaking in a public setting.
And thank you all for inviting me to be here with you this evening. I'm really excited to meet you all virtually and to be here to share a little bit about what we know about food policy councils across the US. I'm going to take about 20 minutes to talk about what food policy councils are and to provide some examples around what counties are doing to address demand in their local food system through policy. And then after that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And I'll preface all of this by saying that if I don't have an answer to a question, I will definitely try to find the answer for you later on. We know only so much about the work of food policy councils from a national perspective. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen.
Does anybody want water that doesn't have coffee?
Yes.
I can go get a couple of waters.
Okay, all right, well, this is their one.
Would that be okay?
I'll just eat that one.
Oh, get you a couple of waters. Okay, that's fine, right? I'll go grab some.
Let's go back to yours. I use the faucet.
All right, we can see your screen, Karen.
Okay, do you see slides? Okay. So to start with, as Becca said, I work for the Johns Hopkins Center
Karen,
for...
you're in presenter view, just so you know, though.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know. There.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So I work for the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, and we, for the past 7 years, have run a project called the Food Policy Networks Project. And this project did not begin with us. It was an outgrowth. We inherited it from the Community Food Security Coalition after it disbanded. And mostly what our project does is support food policy councils across the US. We provide technical assistance, we do some research, we do presentations, we run a listserv, we have a directory of all the councils across the US. And then we also have a resource database that has about 1,300 resources related to food policy councils and food systems. So our role is to kind of take this broad picture of what's happening across the US with these multi-stakeholder coalitions and how they're trying to transform local policy and doing some work at the state level. So we, as Becca said, kind of there's this idea of what a council is, and oftentimes they're thought of as these formal boards with about 15 members that might be appointed or elected, and they sit together and they talk about their food system and they make decisions and recommendations around policy. But what we know from surveying councils for the past 7 years is that their structures vary a lot. So we have this kind of loose definition of what a food policy council is based on 3 key components. So one is that they're an organized group of stakeholders from various sectors across the food system and beyond. Oftentimes they might have someone that's with a planning department, someone that might be related to a social justice organization. So it extends just beyond that notion of kind of people involved in the food supply chain. These groups might be sanctioned by government. They might exist independent of government, but they all have an intent in some way to work across the food system. They're not just anti-hunger organizations or farm advocacy organizations. They really want to look broadly across what's happening throughout their food system. And then lastly, they have some intent to work on policy. We know that often groups, when they get started, will work on building their network, building relationships, building trust with partners, and do some of that through programs. But ultimately, their goal is to expand their work to engage in advocacy and policy work. So in the US, currently there are 283 food policy councils across the US. This number reached its peak in about 2017 and has been slowly going down. And we're not quite sure why, but we continue to track and follow councils. They're mostly organized at a local level. So they either work at a county, city, or a city-county level, although there are about, I think most states, except for about 4, have some form of a state council as well. Their organization, as I said before, is very mixed. They might be embedded in government. They might be housed in a nonprofit. They might also be a grassroots coalition of groups coming together. So there is a variety in the ways that they operate and who serves as kind of their backbone organization. And lastly, this brings up the notion of policy work. They also have a range of relationships with government. So if they're not embedded in government, they may have a representative, a staff member, or an elected official that is a member of their council. They may have a relationship with the government to where a local government might turn to them to seek advice on food systems, because oftentimes they're knowledgeable about what's happening across the food system. They also might, they might be created by legislation, have members that serve. Their members might also be appointed by government. There are a little bit over 10% that have no formal connection to government. So we surveyed councils last year in 2020 about the work that they did related to the pandemic and response to COVID. And this is a list of all of the activities that we gave them in our survey to say, what are you doing? And I bring this slide up to highlight that they're doing a lot, and it's mostly related around these 3 buckets of partnerships, programs, and policy. To work as a multi-stakeholder coalition and to work across the food system, you have to do that through relationships. It's complex. There's a lot that's happening within that system. And so there's a lot of different players in that food system. And so bringing them to the table to understand what's happening is kind of one of the key roles of councils. And when the pandemic hit, they were able to kind of serve this connector role because they had those relationships built. So when restaurants shut down, they could work with them to get them produce, to make meals that then were distributed by food banks. They are also kind of creating repositories of information to connect families with emergency food services. They were also connecting families with farmers or CSAs so that they could access healthy produce when kind of the grocery stores were limited hours or were not stocked fully. And then lastly, they were working on policy to get funding to their communities to help support these initiatives, as well as kind of watching what's happening with all of the changes in the USDA nutrition programs and the federal nutrition programs and benefits available to families to make sure that their community members knew how to access those benefits. So there's a variety of actions that councils take, and I'm going to provide you with just a few examples from some county level councils across the US. And as I looked through my slides just a few minutes ago, I realized that most of these are located either in the East or the Midwest. So I don't have a whole lot from the West Coast or the Western side of the country, and that's an oversight on my part, but just to preface that before we get started. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is kind of these notions of how councils drive demand. And one of the things that they do to drive demand is to make sure that all individuals across the income spectrum have access to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate, and adequate supplies of food. And so a lot of their work surrounds this notion of healthy food access. So the first example is from Adams County, which is located in Pennsylvania. This is a grassroots coalition. It's been around since 2009. It was recognized as a council through a proclamation of their county government, but it's a loose network of individuals who, and it's open to anyone that wants to participate. So there's not appointed members. Anyone that has an interest can come to a meeting and be a part of the council. And they got their start with a project that's called Healthy Options, which was to provide an income support in terms of purchasing food for families that didn't qualify for federal assistance. So they were just above that threshold to receive SNAP Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, but they weren't making enough to kind of be self-sufficient in terms of meeting their food needs. So what this project did was give them an additional monthly voucher of $40. There was no restriction on what they purchased. And they used it at their Adams County Fresh Farmers Market. It started in 2011 as a pilot. It's continued until today. It started with 24 families. They now have 130 families and 75 seniors. And these vouchers they're able to use them at a farmer's market and a local marketplace. And what they found with this project is that it did help to increase people's consumption of fruits and vegetables. They were mainly using the vouchers to purchase meat and fruits and vegetables. And most of the funding from it came from private foundations or individuals. So it was from a hospital foundation, an employee giving campaign, and then there was an annual campaign from Gettysburg College. So it wasn't necessarily coming from a local or a state government, but it was from private foundations within their region. And then more recently, the council has been working on this dashboard that has 50 indicators so they can start to see kind of what's happening with their food system. And they have a number of areas that they're tracking specifically around anti-hunger, healthy food access, food production, economic development, food waste, and community health. And through these, they're creating kind of blueprints or snapshots of what their county looks like at this current time. And they're going to use that dashboard to share information and use it as a measurement tool that community partners can also join in using. So it's publicly accessible, it's web-based, but it gives them an understanding and provides them or points to them as kind of a resource for information about the food system. The next example is from Dane County. This is up near Madison in Wisconsin. This is a council that is, it's embedded in government with their Dane County Board of Supervisors. It was formed in 2005. When they started, they had 12 members that were appointed by various offices within Madison and the county. And at this point today, they only have 8 members. And the council it got started with this initiative with their Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment. They participated in a study of on sustainable agriculture, kind of what were the needs to support sustainable agriculture in their county. And they formed a number of working groups. And what came out of this were a number of recommendations around education, providing access to land, and then creating a workforce that could support more local production. And so it was on the council to kind of help to shepherd these initiatives forward, not being the only partner though. And from that, what they did is help to work with the county to make sure that county land that was owned by the county was accessible for agricultural production, being one means of making it easier for producers to access land. In addition to serving on this committee, they also were able to get the county to pass a resolution stating that food is a human right. And what this resolution did was called for their county government for the county council, the Dane County Food Council, to set up an action plan for how they would address food as a human right. So what would they do to address food access, food-related employment, local food production, and job creation? As far as I know so far, they have a plan that came out in 2014, but I'm not entirely positive what action's been taken past that. And then more recently, they've been really focused on this notion of equity across the county and the city. And so one of the initiatives that they're working with the county in partnership on is a grant program. It's called Partners in Food Equity Project Grants. And what they're doing is providing a small amount of money to organizations to help them to implement projects. And so these grants are going towards establishing a network of garden plots at homes, or to work with youth at a garden to support at-risk youth working in community gardens. They're also working with gardens to supply food pantries, to support summer meals programming, and then also They have a project that works with area growers to promote growing produce that is desirable to different cultures. So kind of diversifying what the producers are growing. These grants are kind of minor. They're up to $2,000 or they can be up to $4,000. And they've been granting these for about 3 years so far. And then we're going to move now to the East Coast to Montgomery County Food Council, which is located in Maryland. It's just outside of DC and encompasses Rockville. The Montgomery County Food Council was formed in 2012 with funding from their Office of the County Executive. So while it's a nonprofit organization and it's always been a standalone council separate from their county, they've always had a close relationship with their county government through the funding that they've received and also through members, government employees sitting on their council. So one of the main projects that they've been working on was a resolution passed by their county council to form this 5-year strategic plan focused on achieving food security within their council. And they shepherded this project. They were one of the leads in bringing together partners and collaborators to identify what are the needs, kind of what do we need to do in our county to address these needs. And so they led public forum discussions, listening sessions, interviews, roundtable discussions. And then the final plan was approved by their county executive in 2017. And since then, they've been working to implement some of the initiatives within this plan. And what that looks like is that they now have an advisory board of community members. It's called the Food Security Advisory Board that are stipend to provide their input for the council and make recommendations on how they can meet some of the goals within the plan. They also launched what's called a food stat database. It's a dashboard that was created in conjunction with the county stat program and their Department of Health to track key indicators that are brought up in the plan. It also includes them being one of the grantors of funding. So they're working with the county to give out grants to different organizations that are supporting some of the goals within the plan. In addition to working kind of on food and food security issues, the council has also been working on creating a campaign to promote what's made in Montgomery County. And this started with an initiative of building a directory of who are all the food businesses, the food enterprises, farmers, anyone that is engaged in producing, processing, and retail distributing of food local food within their community. And so they started by creating this directory. And from that has morphed into an online platform where you can go and find out about local businesses. And it's also turned into a kind of a marketing campaign called MoCo Made. And the campaign was launched with the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. And so they work with them to brand local goods, local producers as being made in MoCo to drive attention to these resources. And then the last thing they created was a food assistance resource directory that connects people that are seeking food with services where they can seek food. Another example is from North Carolina. Pitt County Farm and Food Council is a newer council. It was formed in 2017. It is also embedded in the county. It has 13 members appointed by the county commissioners. And when this county got started, what they did was to do a baseline assessment. So they wanted to know, what does our community food system look like within the county? And so with support from an organization called Community Food Strategies, they did kind of this intensive baseline assessment of what's going on in Pitt County. They also hosted 4 community forums to hear about issues important to their community and their around the food system. And from this, it's helped them they've created a food app finder, which is not just about emergency food services. This is everything from like volunteer opportunities. If you want to get engaged in production and there's a volunteer opportunity, you can go and work on a farm. You can go and work on a emergency services organization. It connects people with educational opportunities where they can find cooking classes or classes where they can bake bread. It includes food pantries. It also includes places where people can apply for SNAP if they need additional assistance. So it's a pretty extensive app that they have populated with information from their county. And then more recently, they hosted a farmer appreciation event to recognize the economic impact of their farmers, their importance, and the success of agriculture in Pitt County. And then the last example is from Michigan. This is Washtenaw County Food Policy Council. They've been around since 2012. Again, they're embedded in the county board. They have 18 members, and they've been heavily active in policy engagement. And one of the things that got them started was Michigan has a state food charter. It's a good food charter that was formed in 2010. And this charter set out a goal for the state to purchase 20% of food from Michigan grown farmers. And so what this looked like was saying that Michigan residents will have access, easy access to affordable, fresh, healthy food, 20% of which is grown in Michigan. And then also Michigan institutions will source 20% of their food products from Michigan growers, producers, and processors. So this charter for the state kind of set this framework for local councils if they wanted to adopt it. It wasn't mandatory, it was an option for them. And so Washtenaw County got started with trying to work with their county to change their procurement policies to give preference to locally grown, processed, and prepared foods. And so they were trying to advocate for them to adopt this policy of trying to guarantee that 20% of their food would come from local growers. But what that did is kind of trigger this notion of, well, what does production look like in our county? And so they did a number of assessments, a farm to institution study to see kind of where there's the gaps between farmers and institutional purchasing. They submitted comments to Ann Arbor's advisory committee to make sure that small producers were included and considered, and agricultural production was considered in the Greenbelt program. And then more recently, they surveyed their farmers in the county to see what kind of barriers existed to expanding their farming operations. In addition to kind of looking at the production side, they've also advocated for, on a state level, for funding to support 10-cent a meal programs. So it provides an additional incentives for schools to purchase local produce that they then serve to kids through their school breakfast program or their school lunch program. And then they've also hosted what's called a candidates forum, where they've invited their state representatives to come and talk about the issues related to food and agriculture that they're interested in. So that's kind of a wide range of things that councils are doing. There's a lot more that they do. A number of councils we know are working on kind of farmers markets and making sure that they're equipped with EBT to accept federal nutrition benefits that they can use at a farmer's market to purchase local foods. There's a number of groups that are working on kind of healthy food access in different ways, from citing grocery stores to helping to support cooperative markets as well. So this is just a glimpse of some of the actions that they're doing. But then I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how do they get to this point of deciding what they're working on, because the food system is large, it's pretty complex. There's a lot of issues that can come up and ideas. I think you guys are talking after this meeting about what are the possibilities and how do you get started in making decisions. So most councils start with some sort of an assessment, not all of them, but it starts with kind of understanding what's going on in their food system. And that could be either through doing research and collecting secondary data. It could also be through these kind of community forums and listening sessions where they're gathering information from community members, kind of what you're doing this evening. And then they have to do something with that to decide what their priorities are. This list of questions is what the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council uses to kind of think about what are the issues that they want to move forward. So is there a connection to their vision or their mission or what they've already set out as goals? Is it an immediate issue that has a major impact on the food system? Is it time sensitive? Is it something that needs to be tackled right away, or can it be on the long-term horizon? Do the issues build or sustain kind of any existing efforts? Can the Food Policy Council make a difference or influence the issue? Kind of considering who's already out there in this space working on this issue so that there's not duplicating services, but being complementary and supporting one another. What community affiliations are they trying to influence? Does the FPC have resources? Do you have financing or funding that you can do to support it? Is there the capacity to take on this issue? Do you know enough to decide? Is there enough information to move an issue forward, or do you need to take time to kind of figure out what is the best strategy around this? And then who's already working in that space? And then lastly, this is a list of resources. I know you can't click on it right now in this virtual space, but there's a number of resources that are available kind of around different strategies or actions or policies that councils or other communities, local governments have taken in order to support their food system. And these are just kind of a few of them that are accessible. And with that, I will stop talking and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. My goodness.
Any specific questions for Karen?
Hi, Karen. Can you hear me?
I can.
This is Kevin Jablonski. So thinking about demand specifically, sort of my experience in thinking is that demand is a tougher nut to crack than supply in many ways. It involves like cultural change, for example, which is difficult and slow. Of the initiative you've mentioned or the food policy councils, what have you seen across the country that quantitatively has significantly moved the needle on demand? You know, the way I've characterized demand is from USDA NAS Ag Census. You know, in our county, it says about 1% of what's grown here is purchased here. That's also a supply issue, but it's also a demand issue. Anyways, I'm curious because a lot of those initiatives you mentioned were somewhat nebulous probably in their quantitative impacts, which is important because of the cultural issue. But nevertheless, do you know of any initiatives that have sort of significantly moved the needle on demand?
That's a really good question. And off the top of my head, I don't. And I think one of the problems is that while councils do all of these things and we have all of this information on what they're doing, we don't have a lot of great data on the impact of these policy changes. And that's one of the gaps in kind of understanding when we look at these changes and what's being instituted in terms of policy, there isn't a lot of great understanding of what the outcomes are from them or what the impact has been, particularly on some of these bigger initiatives of like, do they have greater access to healthy food? Is it addressing kind of health issues, food insecurity issues? So can I get back to you with some examples? And the thing that's coming off to the top of my head is kind of, there's a lot of work that's happening in New England. There's a group called Food Solutions New England that's been really promoting access and production and their local food system. They set a goal of having 60% of their food grown regionally within that kind of geographic area. And they've been working on it for about 10 years. And so I don't know from that if there's really any great information coming out of there in terms of the impact of these initiatives that have been kind of trying to drive demand and production in that region.
Yeah, thanks. If there's anything that jumps out, that'd be awesome to know about.
Yeah.
So Becca, another question is, when we did some research on what the number was in Larimer County as far as supply and demand, that 1% number came up. I think the county in California where San Luis Obispo was closer to 3%. And then there's a county in Oregon that was closer to 3%. And
I can give more numbers on that if you want to have them top of mind.
right, I'm just wondering what the
Maximum is more like 25% of what's grown in county is marketed in county if you look across the country, even 30%.
Yeah. So I mean, we're way off the number, and that's why we're here today is to say, hey, like, why are we so far off of the number?
And Zach, what did you say the percentage was out of San Luis?
I don't know.
Well, the highest volume I know is Davis, California. Does about $50 million in local sales, but they have a total ag economy of about 500 million. But if you look at Chittenden County, Vermont, where Burlington is, the number that comes out from them from the ag census is 22% of what they grow in their county is marketed within their county. There's some that are higher than that, but those are some of the better examples for percentage and total volume.
Right.
And one of the challenges is that we're a regional center. So you go to the farmer's market downstairs on any one day, most of those, actually, the majority of the vendors would not be county-based. They get priority, but just to have that, so that's why it's kind of difficult to capture. And sometimes people will put it into food sheds instead of counties, because really you have everything from southern Wyoming to Denver County coming into this marketplace because we're a regional hub. And so that's why those numbers aren't precise, but they're still probably the right neighborhood.
And they're the best we have, I think, right, is the real thing.
Right.
County-based statistics, even though the county boundaries are not agricultural boundaries.
Right. Well, I mean, I still look, Larimer County is, you might know the number better than me, but I mean, we're top 5 ag counties in the state. So like, theoretically, I mean, this problem, we have an upside down problem here.
Can I add something to this? I think
part of the reason why you see such a low percentage of food that is produced in this county being consumed within this county is culturally in the late 60s, going into the 70s, 80s, 90s, we started seeing food being manufactured on a huge scale. I mean, Colorado is home to one of the largest beef feedlot and slaughter operations in the country. And it's owned by a foreign company, but like you look at these conglomerates and you see it started out as local food. It all started out as local food. I mean, Monfort's used to supply all of the pork to Fort Collins, Denver, on and on and on. But as these corporations got bigger and bigger and bigger, supermarkets started taking over, pushing out all of these small family businesses and markets, you saw a cultural change within your consumer. Your consumers going after things that are cheaper, that are more heavily processed, that are more palatable to them, because the education that our parents had and their grandparents had about preparing these foods in farming and feeding yourself has been lost. And so I feel like that's a big part of the reason why where we're at today.
So I'll jump in, that's a perfect segue. So a lot of us know of barriers that get in the way, right? And the four of us on this task force spent hours talking about all the things that are barriers to getting food to our communities, creating the food to begin with, right? Producing food, getting it to our local communities, educating our local communities. So what I want to do tonight is flip it from talking about the barriers and think about what are the opportunities. So flip that around the other way, right? How do you turn that trend backwards? So what are those opportunities that will help increase demand for local foods, from the individual consumer to restaurants, institutions, grocery stores? What are the opportunities to increase that demand? And so I guess that's a good place for us to jump into our brainstorming. And I'll try to keep an eye on the screen. So folks on Zoom, jump in and shout out loud. We'll hear you.
And this is Becca. I just wanted to check because I know how late it is at Karen's time. Are we all good with Karen? Is everyone, can we let Karen go, or does anyone else have another question?
Any other questions for Karen?
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
You're welcome. Good luck with the brainstorming.
Yeah. Thanks, Becca.
Well, we could start with a couple of pieces of good news. The farmer's market downstairs did have a record year, not by a small amount, but a double-digit gross sales. And that's with everyone agreeing that's not the perfect place to have it. And some of the other places you're talking about, like San Luis Obispo, have multi-day-a-week markets and way longer seasons than we do. A little less livestock products, so that's good news. From when me and Martha started doing Beginning Farmers, we rebuilt some of the middle. There used to be very big farms and very tiny farms. We can now identify 5 or 6 operations around the county that we would call mid-size that are doing.
What is metrics?
The USDA classifies mid-size as between $350,000 and $1 million. And so in gross revenue. And so I think from people we just even know who went through our program, we have at least 5 that are in that $350,000 to $100,000 range now. So we've rebuilt some of our middle class. Yeah. So those are 2 or 3 positive things that are at least showing that if you target strategically some activities, there you can move the needle. It's just it's a very big needle to move from where we had gotten. And 95% of our food was being bought at grocery stores. Now it looks like we're more like 85%, but that's a smattering of farmers markets, farm stands, specialty markets, including something like a Beavers, the independents, usually. So there's also been a little bit of shift of where people buy.
Can you see that was 95% of food was being bought at groceries, now it's 80%?
85, but that's nationwide. We don't have that stat for us, a county, but I guess we would track some.
So another question. So, I mean, it rattles me that there's a ton of restaurants in Larimer County. I don't know how that number compares nationwide. but there's a lot of food that gets served on a plate in Liberty.
We eat out 5 to 10% more than the national average. We do have that stat. 5 to 10 percentage points. So nation, we just went to 50% before COVID. Of course, that pushed back. We were always tracking 5 to 10 to 55 to 60%. It said we eat out a lot.
Right. So I mean, when we're talking demand, that's a big number right there.
The number, there's not easily, and maybe folks in the county have better information than I do, but when I estimate restaurant purchasing in Fort Collins area, $600 million per year was the number I came up with. Locally intermediated sales in 2017, that's sales from farmers to users in the county, but through an entity such as a restaurant or a grocery store, was $72,000.
Well, and this is where Elizabeth can tell you exactly why she targeted thinking she was coming into her business to do restaurants and why they have not been what she had hoped. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you know the story better than anyone.
Okay, so I started Loco Foods 10 years ago. And the idea was that I was going to be supporting a lot of the smaller growers and servicing a lot of the grocery stores and restaurants in the area. And I found very quickly and very frustratingly that I was competing with the growers that I was trying to support at the back door to the restaurants. And I also found that restaurants would buy once from me or the farmers that I was working with, say that they were buying locally and then go back to Shamrock or whoever their regular suppliers were. And if they were doing well, then they would change their menu and then you would have to start all over, or they would change their chefs and you would be starting all over. And so in trying to not compete with the local growers that I was trying to support, I actually have shifted over and I do mostly processed foods. So now I carry mostly salsas, sauces, beverages, kombuchas, granolas, chips.
Meat.
Some meat, I mean, some, it's hard. We don't have any chicken processing in the whole state.
Nope.
We don't have, pork processing is really hard. Beef is hard because how are you gonna cut it? And how are you gonna move the whole animal? I don't know.
I have answers to
Yeah,
those
there's-
questions.
and there's-
You just ended that story on us.
There, I think if we want to talk about restaurants, I think there's a gap in, and again, chefs change all the time, so that's really hard. But as a meat producer, and even at one point I was a vegetable producer, the restaurants understanding that if they have a desire to be local, they have to also be flexible. You can't come to a farm like me and say, I want to buy 50 lamb chops every week, put it on my menu. When I sit there going, what do I do with the rest of it? You've got to have that creativity. If you're going to use local, you've got to understand the seasonality of what you're using local. So I don't know how restaurants adjust to that if they want to talk local, unless they're fine with that method of I buy local for a month and then it got too hard, but I put it on my menu and it stays there and now I go back to Shamrock. Like, how do we bump through that barrier?
That might tie back into Dawn's piece of saying it's education. Sorry, Martha.
It has to be a cultural shift, and I don't think it's here in Fort Collins yet. I mean, the magazine goes to Denver and Boulder as well, and you see a lot of that happening in those markets on a much larger scale. Those chefs are committed to making those changes, and I think it's just a shift here in the community. It's happening. There are a few of those restaurants that you can really see them kind of diving into that. I think Little's a great example. The regional does a little bit of that, but we have a lot of burger pizza joints and they have a set menu and it doesn't change. Like it's about consistency. And so I think that chef piece is a little bit of a challenge here. I think it's changing. I absolutely do. But until those chefs are here in this market and are really willing to make that commitment, that's tricky.
Wait, isn't that advertising culture and not just a business model?
Absolutely. To Kevin's point, it's like the cultural shift, right? And not like.
Well, and chefs and restaurants or grocery stores aren't going to do it unless they're being asked to.
Exactly.
The consumer's got to be saying, hey, aren't you doing something local?
Yep.
And so there's a disconnect between, and I know Becca disagrees, but disconnect between trying to educate them and trying to build demand from that side. certainly can't afford any kind of marketing campaign or anything, but
But having those few chef advocates, like, you know, and Sheila Lucera, who is the executive chef of all the big red F restaurants, comes to mind, because she's actually, she goes to Congress and speaks about sustainable seafood. When you have somebody that's an advocate at that level, that's really a voice for whatever the movement is, it's kind of like finding that champion or that advocate here in this market and letting them really kind of beat that drum, and kind of be an endorsement for it. And I think that if they're respected in the community, the rest of them follow, right? Like it's a domino effect of like, oh, so-and-so's doing it over at their place, we want to do it too.
So is there any restaurants in this area that change their menus seasonally?
Little regional do.
So we're talking about two?
Jack's, which is Sheila's.
And she would be a
What's the
wonderful.
other?
Bistro Natil.
Natasha. Hey, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Just really quickly, I just wanted to, while we're talking about restaurants, mention that the Food Shed project, which is a local powerhouse here with local foods, they are trying to increase the attraction of a restaurant being local. And so they are, they've developed actually, and some restaurants already have it, I believe, but Gabby would know more. She's the ED. They are doing a local, it's like locally certified restaurant. I don't know the name correctly. That's probably not exactly what they've called it, but they're doing that program to try and do sort of what's being discussed right now with increasing the attraction of committing to local, and then having consumers identify those restaurants and making it, you know, like, oh, as a consumer, I'm going to choose to go to that restaurant that has that sticker on their door that's certified local. Again, I can't remember the exact terms, but I just wanted to mention that they're trying to push the marketing side of it to make it more attractive to chefs to commit to that, because consumers buy into that. So I just wanted to shout out the food project there and mention that that's something they're trying to do, but they're trying to get more traction on it because they've just started it out.
And Tasha, what was the name of that restaurant?
Natasha, it's Kevin. I'm here. I can describe that, but thank you for
Oh,
that.
perfect.
So Food Shed Project is the nonprofit that I discussed in the beginning. We founded a certified local program about 1.5 years ago with standards for local restaurants to basically demonstrate that they're putting their money where their mouth is in terms of their marketing. And, you know, local washing is a phrase that people use now of putting a restaurant on your menu and then not really actually putting a farm on your restaurant menu and not really purchasing from them. I don't vilify restaurants in that case, because I think one of the reasons they go to a local farmer and then back to Shamrock is inconsistent supply, inconsistent quality, and just the challenges of putting a locally sourced meal on the plate for $24 when no one in Fort Collins wants to spend $35 for a meal.
Nail on the head.
So just briefly, the certified local has standards at the core and the exceptional level, and so far 3 restaurants in the area have certified. One is Little at the exceptional level, the other 2 are Bistro Natil and the regional at the core level. And we have other programs that are well funded, but that program actually has not been well funded so far, so we're looking for funding.
And then, Karen mentioned like a chef's dinner and kind of bringing that culinary community together with the ag community and sharing a meal over it. And I think inviting the public into that space as well, because there's that connection that happens over food, right? And having, you know, the saying, know your farmer, know your food, right? Like when you have that connection, that face-to-face with that person across the table from you, you're going to be more inclined to purchase those products locally. And so I really love the idea of that kind of the farmer appreciation dinner and really celebrating and highlighting the farmer, not the chef, making it about the farmer and the work that they've put into it. And letting the public experience that. And I think that would be a great way. You bring those 3 chefs together and let them prepare the meal as like a thank you for their ag partners. And I think that would be something that would be really impactful.
Just one more point, and I'll stop talking, just to add to that.
Kevin, we can't see the video anymore. Something happened. I don't know if Matthew's computer.
It was just a little tech accident. We'll get it fixed.
Just to say, sorry, John, that is built into the program, but ultimately what we see restaurants is, in terms of demand, is not actually buying a lot of products, but thought leaders, because they show people what is available locally and say, oh, I didn't know I could get this locally
and how to
on the
prep it.
menu.
And how to prep it.
You know,
They do it
I've spent a lot of time in food hubs and markets and, you know, you go to Japan and you go to a grocery store, or you go to a food hub there, and it's just massive amounts of food and people, and there's an energy there. And no criticism of the farmer's market, but the farmer's market is people buying asparagus and stuff to take home and cook dinner. There's not this energy of you know, food trucks and breweries. And I mean, I mentioned this to Clyde, and he said he lived across from a place like this in LA. But I think about something like a Pike Place Market here without the salmon. I don't know if you've ever been there, they throw the salmon, where there's an energy that because if you got people coming in and not so much participating, but experiencing that, all of a sudden they're gonna start to get excited about more than just buying squash and broccoli and whatever you have farmers market this week. I mean, I really.
This is Lucy at Hazeldale. Can I make a point to that actually with the farmers market, kind of what you're going on? If this is a good spot to jump in.
Yeah.
So one thing that I was thinking about in this conversation, so we are very successful at our farmers markets, and we had a great year at the Larimer County Farmers Market. So I definitely saw those numbers go up. But where we really kill it is the Boulder County Farmers Market. And it really kind of is that they have this very long season. It's April 2nd through our last one is coming up this Saturday, and we're mushrooms, you know, so we grow year round. So we're able to participate in those markets, but those markets just crush it compared to our local market. And I really want to see our local Fort Collins market just really kind of take off in that same regard. And I think that's part of it. There's a lot of live music, there's a lot of vendors, and there's just a lot of buzz in the community, and they're in really excellent spots too, like highly visible. They've been there for a long time. They have a curbside pickup program. So I think that that's one thing that like our county could do better. Because I mean, we're like right down the street from the Larimer County Farmers Market. So I'd really love to see my hometown market just crush it on the mushrooms. But Boulder County, that's something that they really have down. If we can kind of take a look at the way that they are running those markets, because they are just, they really create a lot of buzz. So.
But if you don't mind sharing, just for relativity, are they double the sales? Are they triple the sales? The markets there or what?
So the Longmont market is double, and the Boulder Farmers Market is probably 4 times what we do at the Larimer County Farmers Market, just to give you an idea. So.
What happens in winter?
Well, you know, we are in winter, we do lots of restaurants, and we also are open for retail sales at our farm. And we have a lot of really loyal, wonderful customers. But, you know, we also do work with distributors. So, you know, we are also, you know, we work with regional Whole Foods and Sprouts and and those are some of our larger customers. But man, we look forward to those farmers market seasons every year, because it's really just like some nice extra like bread and butter for us that we can depend on during certain times of the year. But definitely the expanded season is awesome. The expanded hours, the location. So there's something that I feel like that our county could look at doing, maybe kind of similar to those, and take a closer look at what makes those markets so successful.
I was just gonna say, I think part of that's a great point, Lucy, and part of it is they really run those markets like a business, and each market is considered like an individual profit center. And so, you know, they really keep careful track of the revenues, and they are, I think, and I'm just saying this objectively, I think, you know, they look really carefully at all the different ways those markets can provide additional value to the growers. And so, I mean, I think it's in part, it's the staffing, the resource base there, but it's also just the way that Farmers Market Association has been designed and run for the past.
I've got a question about that then. Does the county provide the staff for those markets to keep the cost to the business through staff?
It's the Farmers Market Association, the Boulder.
It's independent.
Okay, and so, but are the costs higher to participate in those markets to the growers and producers?
They're actually cheaper. It's like quite a bit cheaper. I think in Longmont, it's only 3%. In Boulder, including paying the city sales tax, it's like, I want to say 8. And Larimer County's been more around 9. So it's actually the charge to us to participate in those markets is less.
Is that because of volume? They got more vendors?
I'm not sure why. You'd have to ask them, but they definitely are bigger for sure.
They price discriminate, so they charge very little to fresh produce and meat producers. Those food trucks and vendors that are doing prepared foods are subsidizing the market. So I think they're like 15% on those guys, but for those food trucks, that's still minimal overhead. So they basically have structured their fees. The last I knew was 15% for them to keep the ring of fresh produce at 3%. And then their value added products pay a bit more than 3%, but these guys qualify for the lowest amount.
So does location have something to do with it? Because I live in South County, Loveland, and seems like the primary food market that we're talking about is here at the county courthouse. And well, that's not really centrally located for a lot of people. Berthoud has its own farmers market. Loveland does. Jack's does one at their facility in Loveland. And it seems like we're bisecting it and segregating it into little markets. And maybe it's the wrong location.
That is the case in Fort Collins. I think there's just too many little markets spread out as opposed to like one big central market where everybody comes to get all their food.
Guys, can you do me a favor on the Zoom meeting? Just tell me who you are speaking so I can just capture it. Sorry. Who was that?
Hey, Lucy.
Lucy again? Okay, thank you.
Lucy, I got a question for you. How would you describe your client base in Fort Collins, Loveland versus your Boulder clients? Do they tend to be more educated and more conscious about what they're eating in Boulder versus here in Loveland, Fort Collins? What is your typical customer like? And what do you think the differences between the two are?
We're talking about farmers markets specifically, as opposed to direct to consumer.
I'm more interested in the farmers markets for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. To be honest with you, it's kind of hard to know because we're so slammed. There's a line the entire time. So it's really hard to talk to people, but I will say, Boulder definitely has like a reputation, so it's a lot of like food loving, local loving hippies, I wouldn't say they're necessarily like more educated or maybe anything like that, but definitely seems like there's maybe some populace that's maybe a little more in touch with their local foods and maybe a little more with exotic foods too, because we're mushrooms. And so we're kind of more of a specialty crop. So
real quick on the farmer, so we went and toured, the county commissioners went and toured a few farms in Larimer County. We stopped at Native Hill Farm. Kevin, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but Nick told us that he didn't go to farmers markets this year, I don't believe, or his number was way down. I think he told me his farm stand number and his farm market number actually switched from 2020 to 2021, like 80-20 numbers. Does that sound?
Yeah, they were at farmers market, but I think you're seeing a trend among the more like large, small scale, and then medium scale vegetable producers that they're going to farm stands versus going to the market because they're doing really well. And the county just changed the farm stand, voting rules, so that helps a lot. Yeah.
That's what we see at the Berthoud market is that a lot of farms will come and we do the same thing Boulder does. Our fees are way lower than everybody else's, but if you're a farm, you're paying 2% back to the market. If you're not a farm, you're paying 4% back to the market. But what we see is new farms get all excited to come to the farmers market for a couple of years. They build up their client base and then they switch to the CSA model. And as a fellow farmer, I appreciate staying home on Saturday mornings to do chores around my farm instead of packing a bunch of stuff up, hauling it someplace, unpacking it, sitting for a few hours, selling a bunch of stuff. So you get to that point where they build that client base, they can convince that client base to come directly to them, and then they stop coming to the market.
Yep.
If I could quickly just jump in here regarding the Boulder farmers markets, one of the other reasons that the pricing is quite fair for producers is Boulder, and I don't know if it's a city thing or a county thing, and I was just trying to find the website, but they have a sugar tax, and that sugar tax goes directly into, there's about 30 organizations that benefits from that, including SNAP, Double Up Bucks, and the Boulder County Farmers Market, which is a non-profit private entity organization, gets a substantial portion of that funding as well. It is publicly listed. I can't find it right now, but I just want to mention that is something that's really cool that Boulder has done. It also, I mean, some of those funds go to like women's shelters and really incredible things. And I think and that elevated the ability for them to pay their, his name is Brian, he's one of the directors, and they can have staff that are paid outside of the percentage of the farmer having to pay the staff. They have exterior funding coming in. So I think that that's pretty incredible, and it would be something interesting to explore here. So I just wanted to add that to the Boulder County Farmers Markets, as they do have funding from a sugar tax. And we still can't see the team, by the way. I don't know if we know that, but all I can see is the typed notes as opposed to any of the room. I just have Matt's.
Here, so I can stop sharing, and then you should be able to see the room from the camera.
So it's just an M. So like Matt's camera seems to be off.
See, it's pointed right at.
There we go.
There we go. There we go. It's back.
Really not that excited. I'm very disappointed.
Perfect.
I was just gonna say, to maybe wrap up the farmer's market portion of it, that's a great point about the different investments they've made, and they've made huge investments in healthy food access. And so they run not just, they accept DBT, they do Double Up Food Box, but they also have their own incentive programs. And so by the time you layer all of this on, they've been able to subsidize a lot of food availability for people in need. And so there's certainly those dichotomies in Boulder too. So I mean, yes, they're able to pay their staff well and everything, but they also invest a lot of that in trying to feed the more vulnerable people in the community.
And I think that's something that we have to think about for the, if we're gonna make recommendations to the county commissioners, because price is very much a barrier to people. I mean, I can afford to go to the market and buy stuff, but I notice the cost. I notice the price, and there's a lot of people that can't afford to go to that market and buy that good food that's there because of it. So I heard Karen talk about some subsidy types of programs. And, the devil's in the details, but how do you subsidize food to underserved or underprivileged populations? Whether it's through, we tried to get the school people here and they weren't available, but whether it's to, school programs, breakfast or whatever, or to people coming to the market. I know they take SNAP dollars there, but I don't know what percent of the sales is
It was substantial this year.
Was it? Okay.
It is, and they do Double Up Food Bucks, so they'll provide an extra $20 for every visit, once a week.
Is that promoted? Is that
Through the county, so the county, of course, registers people food stamps and stuff. So because our county extension office, which also runs it, is in the same location, I think they do a pretty good job of getting the word out. But we still always have people like, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, right.
But I think compared to 5 years ago, it's going great guns.
And they've also done an incentive program, which they did private fundraising, the market, Larimer County
Yeah.
did private fundraising for older, like for seniors who needed access to healthy food. So that was another target population, but there are obviously a lot more, food vulnerable folks in our community.
How could you reach, what could the county commissioners do to help some group, whether it's extension or whether it's a farmer's market, reach more underserved populations that aren't coming to the market? I mean, think about it.
The Food Shed Project just started a partnership with La Familia.
Okay,
because that is definitely a demographic of the city that doesn't feel they're served well or with culturally appropriate options. And so I don't know if they approached us or we approached them, but we just started a conversation. We do have a grant in to really actually pursue that pretty actively that we'll be hearing about hopefully soon, but that's totally in its baby steps of first steps.
is that like a marketing type of thing or just not?
We can share that.
Okay, I guess we can announce now, we are getting a USDA grant. It'll be announced next week.
Good.
For planning for $200,000. Their partner, Recovery, on here as a partner. I think we ended up putting No Konash on as a partner for the restaurant. We didn't get No Konash? Okay, we approached No Konash and they were interested in the vein of they could help us when we do certified restaurants, promote them because we're actually really lucky to have No Konash because that's one of the delivery services that returns a lot to the restaurants and is owned locally. But who all is
I
our
was talking about
partners
the
then?
Regional Food System Partnership Grant.
Yes.
Which that's the local food promotion program grant.
Oh,
Yeah.
wrong
Separate
grant,
grants.
sorry.
how do you-
So La Familia, the Cavery,
Growing Project, Food Valley Community Farms, and that's it.
It's a
CSU
marketing campaign.
Extension was on that.
I believe CSU Extension is listed somehow, but I'm.
we were a letter of support.
So,
Too many things.
There's access to folks who can't afford produce at the current price, and that's supportive programs that provide funding. There's a potential of supply solutions to access, because once you have enough local supply, you have producers that can target different populations. For example, there are plenty of people in the Latinx community who can afford local food, but don't purchase it because what's there is not something appealing to them. So in a more diversified local food economy, you have folks that are going to target those populations because they're an awesome market, right? There will always be folks who can't afford any food whatsoever, whether it's grocery store. I think there's always going to be supportive programs, but also in a more mature local food economy. I don't even know if these exist across the country, but I know producers who tell me they could do this, that they could grow at scale to grow products that are actually affordable, like in the grocery store. Like a Native Hill farm, if they grew 4 acres of carrots, they could be priced, and Hayden does this. Hayden, you could speak to this. Hayden can grow at volume at prices that are grocery store accessible. You just have to know as a producer that you have that market there in advance to grow that much produce. So I think there are a lot of solutions to access, and they're not all just government giving money to be able to step up to.
That's not a long-term solution.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
To that point, this is Elizabeth Loco. I have been daydreaming and shouting at a different meeting about how it would be really fun to have a Colorado, a regional, a county brand. We have Colorado Proud, it's fine, I mean, sure, whatever. But it'd be fun to have something that was like, these are these growers, we have these things available. Whether it's meat, pork, carrots, whatever, these are the things that are available. And they can be, if as a wholesale distributor, I had a way that I could buy these things and then know that I would, when I got them and I delivered them, then you could see which grower they came from, then you could know. But if there was some way of coordinating a brand, a Larimer County in Northern Colorado brand that said, these are our products, this is what's available. And they meet these attributes.
Your comment's super valid. I have a problem. I think there's all these silos of different programs that go on. Like I was in a 3-hour meeting today with the soil health guys that are talking about their STAR program, and then you've got the Colorado Proud program, and you've got all these other programs. I'm like, why can't you, what's the problem here? Why can't Colorado CDA marketing department get these things aligned a little bit? Because like, they're all fascinating ideas. Like, yes, people do probably want to buy food that's grown on a farm that has better practices. Great, yes. But then Colorado Proud is there. How do you get those things aligned?
I think, if I may, I think some of the difference is that the Colorado Proud is just kind of an umbrella, like,
oh yeah,
this is a thing. What I'm kind of imagining, and something that I never had the political capital to do, is we need the growers to work together to say, these are the products that we have, and we can provide them at a volume. And I know that's hard, because if you don't have a market for them, that's really hard. But I have relationships with.
But the Canadians are doing it all the time. I mean, there's IGAs all around north of here And that's
And I just want to add too, New York does this already. So what New York did is they realized that their equivalent of Colorado Proud was essentially meaningless. They separated a separate program that was only for grown and raised products. And then now they have such a significant bill where they're offering a 25 cent per meal premium for any school that purchases at least 30% New York State grown and raised products. There is a little bit of a processed allowance there, and they maintain a very detailed database that has exactly the kind of information you're talking about. And I think part of it was the state passed a metrics bill, right? So Elizabeth, to your point, they like required distributors to start actually maintaining this information. But anyway, I feel like the challenge of this conversation right now is like, I guess Larimer County could write a letter to the state suggesting this happen, but I don't think that our markets division has the capacity to do this, given some of the conversations I've been part of. So, I think the question is more like in terms of stimulating demand. I'm sorry, I missed a tiny bit of the conversation, like having some of these institutional buyers commit to X, Y, or Z, like where are the places where there would need to be an incentive to put systems in place to make sure that they had access to information so that it didn't just dramatically increase transaction costs, particularly at this moment where they're having all of these supply chain and labor and other kinds.
Well, two things. Pre-COVID, Colorado Department of Ag had started talking about a tiered Colorado Proud system. So Colorado Proud is some benchmark base level. Okay, it's a Colorado company. But then what if we tiered it, whether it's because of environmental practices or location? And it, just like Becca said, they said, we just don't have the bandwidth. That said, I think they would not get in the way of any region and or initiative that was nonprofit, for-profit would get iffy, that would want to pilot doing the tier and them managing themselves, as long as they got some say and oversight of whatever criteria you use, being even-handed, non-discriminatory, whatever. So because like Becca said, it's mostly because they don't have the bandwidth to manage something like that. I also think they would not get in the way of a region and or initiative saying, can we pilot if you guys have some interactivity with how it's established, how it's monitored, how it's audited. So that is an open door, I think, particularly if you point to a state like New York and say, we would pilot it somewhat trying to assemble something akin to ...
Can I ask just some ignorant consumer questions here? How much more money is it to shop at a farmer's market versus a grocery store? Like to meet a standard family's diet requirements?
Do you cook from scratch or do you like the stuff already kind of evaluated?
From scratch.
From scratch, not as big of a gap as if it's these people who go and buy the value added stuff or only buy the middle cuts of meat instead of being willing to figure out what to do with the shoulder. So like he said, there's some producers now who are hitting pretty close to grocery store. If you're cooking from scratch, like potatoes, you're pretty darn close. If you're buying value added stuff in middle or the premium parts of meat, up to double.
Yeah. So there's a few, Kevin can probably relate with me a little bit on this. I mean, I have 4 kids at home. In general, it's not the price, it's the convenience. So like my wife would spend 20% more and not even go select her own food because now you can order it and have them load it in the back of your car. That option is not very readily available at a farmer's market.
But it sounds like it is a golden.
And so there's a place, I mean, I just know young families, I mean, it's convenience speaks pretty loudly when it comes to buying anything.
We had thought with COVID, we had thought about trying to figure out how to do that at the Berthoud Farmers Market. How people could put it in order and then we would route it to our farmers and they would have it all ready to go. And we would go to each of the farmers, gather up the stuff, package it, have it, and the inventory management for a market our size, right? It would all fall on me because nobody else in the organization that understands supply chain like that. But the idea of I've got to ask all my farmers to tell me what their inventory is going to be, by that next Saturday, get it posted on websites so people can place orders and nobody shows up disappointed because Susie thought she was going to harvest 10 pounds of potatoes and she only harvested 5, but I sold 8 of them. Right. And I know other markets are doing this. I know there are organizations that were making this work, but I looked at the size of our farms at the Berthoud Farmers Market and the expectation that they would go into the database and plug in their inventory every week, like, so that we could do a pre-sale like that. I was like, "Oh, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen."
And the first year Boulder County did that. So the COVID year, they lost money on it because they had to build that whole online platform, develop the inventory stuff, had to have somebody, they had a whole pick and pack set up in a warehouse. And I went down and spent a day one time just watching how they manage with coolers and getting stuff into trucks. And it's a huge task. So, I mean, if it looks like there's the customer base for that, it would be its own like business, I think.
I mean, to add to that conversation, I mean, Morning Fresh Dairy is going crazy right now, adding more products to their line and more people to their line and it's mostly out of convenience, right? Like this stuff lands on my porch in a cooler.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not necessarily the price point that's gonna stop you, it's the convenience. And I mean, Rob is up there he's trying all kinds of crazy stuff. And I mean, I'm right there with him as much as I can saying, hey, look, but what about this? And what about this?
But they have the product that speaks compared to any other milk on the market. I mean, it's the best milk around. Hence, I don't know, for me, I don't drink from them.
Alan.
I know. I love your ice cream. I've
It's
been,
not about the quality.
yeah,
It's convenience. I'm like Zach. I mean, I'm retired. I got all the time in the world, and I will not. I've been to the farmer's market in Larimer County once to see what it was like. Otherwise, I go to Safeway or Whole Foods.
Purchaser in your home?
Pardon?
Are you the primary food purchaser in your home?
And cook.
So farmer's market, trying to reinvent the wheel and create a convenient distribution system that's readily accessible at all hours is not what farmers markets are for. We have them, they're called grocery stores. And the way that people can make it convenient is that we make sure local food can be in grocery stores by having infrastructure, aggregation capacity, and sufficient supply
and EID.
to be aggregated over time.
Thank you.
Farmers market, I agree with John, should go in the opposite direction. Farmers market should not be coming like grocery stores. They should be coming like festivals. Where if you're so inclined, you want to be there. When you see someone on Friday night, you say you can see at market tomorrow. I lived in towns like that.
You said you lived across from one in Los
Well,
Angeles,
Pike Place
right?
Market, I mean, that's a destination for that town. I mean, every time I go there.
And for tourists.
That's what I'm saying. It's a destination, tourism destination for.
And you-
marketed there.
you can look at Atlanta and their Pond City Market. They took a building that historically had been abandoned for about 30 years. And when I was growing up and living in that area and eating in that area, I'm not gonna be politically correct. I watched prostitutes fight each other. Right before I left that city and moved out west to take up this trade, it had completely turned 180 degrees. They revitalized that market. They poured a whole bunch of money into the communities, getting food accessibility out there, helping the food desert, because that place, that part of the city was really rough. You didn't go out after dark alone because chances were you were gonna get mugged. And now I'm watching teenagers, walk down the street alone, ride skateboards alone. I'm seeing like 12-year-old kids. So these marketplaces are a wonderful thing to congregate and get these people together if you provide the right space. And I think that's the huge issue here is there isn't a consistent space that is easily accessible. It isn't a comfortable venue. If it rains, everybody has to pack up. Everybody has to pack up or go home, batten down the hatches.
Good point. Now, I think that some of the CSU folks might be able to fill in some gaps here. The Denver Stock Show, the old Coliseum is still slated to be a 24 or the 365-day-a-year farmers market. Does that sound right?
Becca knows more than me, but I think that got tabled.
Yeah, it happened.
We just submitted a grant to try to make it happen, but essentially the city and county of Denver need a crap ton of money to actually do it.
So it's the same kind of picture, right? It's a tough part of town.
But the challenge is all the cities you're talking about are orders of magnitude bigger and buying power than us. I mean, this is slightly a scale problem of, and we do get a lot of tourists, so that helps us a ton. But even Boulder is twice our buying power. So they should get twice the sales. So some of this is a scale issue, although I think we do not harness the fact that between our microbrew culture and the tourists that are drawn by that and our outdoor economy, we probably punch above our weight in terms of what kind of food dollars are spent here, but we have not harnessed that at all. We don't benefit from the fact that Odell's patio is full every single afternoon, every single.
So, but why doesn't Odell's do a small farmer's market?
Oh, they used to actually.
I didn't know that.
Do a little, quarterly. Wasn't necessarily a farmer's market, it was a maker's market. So I would go there with honey once every quarter or so. And it was always on Father's Day, Mother's Day, you know, other events where people are already out happy and drinking beer and spending money. It was great. They have not done it post-pandemic. Okay.
So I've been holding on to this kind of thought. It's a little off topic. We brought up in Boulder County how they're kind of subsidizing their market. And I kind of want to draw a paradigm to a multi-billion-dollar corporation here within the state. Look at JBS. They're being given water for free. What are they doing with that free water? They are growing corn and they are watering cattle, and they're doing it extremely cheap. And when they're buying cattle from producers, whether it's in Larimer County, I can name quite a few right off the top of my head that are getting shafted at auction because the large buyers are refusing to pay any more than X amount of price, and they're driving the price of their retail beef up astronomically. Since I've been in the business, I've watched prices skyrocket. So look at this income source that these people have, okay? Look at the market share that they have, the amount of Safeways, King Supers, the amount of boxed beef being sold. The money's not going back to people within the communities that are actually producing this beef. So
there's a barrier there, and you and I talked about this.
Okay.
I had conversations with the guy in charge of local for Safeway.
Okay.
Safeway Denver division. And I also had a conversation with the gentleman that's now been appointed head of local for Denver division for Sprouts. Sprouts' new CEO has basically he said, we're gonna buy more local. Now,
Sprouts said that?
The CEO of Sprouts said, we're gonna buy more local.
Exactly. I used to work for
I
Sprouts.
want to talk to you about that. Because I do a lot with Sprouts. They're one of my biggest customers, but I do want to talk.
And they're good to work with or not? Okay.
The guy I talked to, he said there's two things that they require for DSD local foods.
They didn't used to do DSD.
I know, they got a new CEO.
Used to all go through
Yeah,
me
right.
because I could help them anyway. But what's
No,
DSD?
it's direct store door.
Okay.
They need two things. They need an agreement with Sprouts and they need an EDI system. And you know how much an EDI system costs.
Yep, that's what I have.
And that's what you have. Safeway said, we want to do local as much as we can. I got 137 stores in the Denver division. You got to be able to supply them all.
And I do.
Yeah, but you can't, one farmer can't do that.
No, but I do.
You do, that's right.
So this is what I'm saying. I want a brand where all the growers come together and say, we can pull all these things together. We can make it so that between us growers, we can produce all the carrots you're going to need for this period of time. And then I know that I can have them for a reliable year-round production for Safeway or Sprouts or whoever we get deals with. Because I have those relationships. I have invested in that software and I have invested in the warehousing, the trucks, and all the pieces that already go there. What I need is I need the growers to work together to make consistent, reliable product through time.
Is Rocky Ford's basically a regional brand or a local brand? Isn't it? I mean, anybody growing down there says we're Rocky Ford and you go, oh my God, this is the best.
Or Hatch.
So
Or Hatch.
I hear, Elizabeth, great, you've come up with two good suggestions. And so I've heard us talking around the problem tonight.
Yeah.
And I think the idea tonight was to get out and talk to you.
Yeah, right, sorry.
Start digging and saying, what are some of the solutions? Well, if I could just have a wish granted to me, this is what it's gonna be.
If wishes
And I
are
think,
wishes,
you know, we're
give me a
running,
brand.
and I'm just trying to help because I don't want us to run out of time and walk out here without any good ideas on the table. We got a half hour, 40 minutes left. We can go a little longer if we need to. Is to think, maybe, what is your wish? What do you think there's something? Is it something the county can do? Do we need to look at this problem more regionally? Do we need to get the local municipalities to work closer together to create better spaces and better venues and to create, I heard you talking about, making more of a festival environment. I think these are all great ideas. We just need to flush a handful more out because this task force that's working on this ultimately is going to put some ideas in front of you county commissioners and say, how can we get you guys to help us with these problems and go with some solid solutions.
And they could be ideas that cost money.
So the county should support a revitalized farmer's market at the Powerhouse 2 space because you own the market and you can invest in it. The county should hire a regional food coordinator position, either in collaboration with the city of Fort Collins or on its own, to support all of these things over time. It should create a localized brand that can assist producers in aggregating their product to sell through grocery stores. We need more supply for that, I think, but what do you got?
Collaboration with CDA, not in competition with it.
I heard when Becca was talking, and I've thought about this way you guys were all talking when I worked on the comprehensive plan for the county, it was about everybody seems to be, as was brought up earlier, in their own silos. And nobody's talking outside of their silos. How do we break down those silos and we start talking together? Is there a food council that needs to be formed? Maybe that's an idea. Elizabeth, you got some great ideas.
Okay.
Chime in.
What I would love to see, if wishes were fishes, I want a brand, but I also would like, because there's the political capital thing, you can't go and tell a bunch of growers what to do. You can't do it. But if the county or whatever the food policy group is, can convene a way of helping them collaborate, helping them facilitate a conversation for how they can work together for what they need to pull together a cooperative. Because I don't think that it should be a county cooperative. I think it should be a growers cooperative. And I think that they need to figure it out. But I think that it needs to be maybe perhaps convened by the county.
Is it a cooperative or is it an association? Because the
I don't
cooperative's
care.
got a financial
I do not care.
aspect to
Can
it.
you figure that out on their own?
We've got the Larimer County Farmers Alliance. That's an organization that brings producers.
Hayden is the president.
Yeah.
Cool. Hayden will.
So where does like a Grubhub, we are in a new era right now. Where does like a Grubhub or a DoorDash or all these other things? I live out.
A human grinding
Hey,
wheel.
guys, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just moderate for a minute. I need people not to have side conversations. We've got people on the Zoom meeting. We have to have one at a time. Zach, it's yours.
So I mean, I just don't know where local delivery comes in with that because it's a different time frame than we were even a year ago.
Well, some experience with things like Grubhub and DoorDash is that there aren't enough drivers when you get out to more rural places for things to be delivered. Like they're not gonna drive.
But that's not your big demand. That's your supply, but your demand is probably in town.
All right, that's fair. But from the producer side, some of those organizations kind of take a lot off the top. Can be hard to work with for smaller businesses. I know our bakery in town has tried to work with DoorDash and they have way too many times where the delivery never happens. But so they don't get paid, but the product went out the door. And so they don't get paid because the driver just decided, I don't want to drive that far or whatever. So there's some gaps there too that make it maybe, the amount we've got to pay to be a part of those delivery services sometimes aren't financially feasible.
Except we have no Konash here, who is a good citizen in that space. We've never approached him. You could say, what would it take to have you guys be willing to do box food deliveries just like you would do a restaurant delivery? We just never have.
Natasha, let's go online real quick. Natasha.
So I was about to mention Noco Nosh as well, because they're locally owned, but Dawn, take it away.
Sorry, Natasha.
And sorry, can you describe what Noco Nosh is again?
It's Grubhub and Uber, but if you hadn't heard, they got almost predatory with their pricing structure for restaurants. So our restaurants came together and made their own organization here in Fort Collins. They own that system. They pay their drivers way better. They're better to work for, and a higher, I think something like all but 15% gets to the restaurants, where if you look at the national models, they were taking up to 35% of the delivery mode. So they already have that infrastructure built. And again, they would have light times of day. If you think about it, they're really busy at lunches, very busy at dinners, but they have these afternoon lulls where drivers are released almost. You could actually approach them about, well, what do you think about food box delivery? Kind of Morning Fresh is doing it too, but they could be another asset that isn't as connected to a specific farm that we've never asked, and they might be open to it depending on what the value proposition is.
Larimer County is more than Fort Collins. Is Fort Collins the only place that's gonna drive demand for us?
They do Loveland and Greeley as well. And then, I mean, again, you could stretch them. And I think they just opened one in Boulder. A new franchise of it.
Would the restaurants object to them delivering food boxes, meal kit? I don't want to call them meal kits, but
Why is it, it's not that you sign up as a participating restaurant, right? And understand that you have this 50% fee for delivery. It's
Well,
not
that's
very-
why the restaurants like it, is they were being abused, and like, they didn't want to be an Uber Eats. Uber Eats was just scanning their menu and delivering them anyway. I'm sorry, you were touching.
So I think a wonderful solution, and Elizabeth brought it up wonderfully, is getting farmers to work as a cooperative. So a huge thing that I see a lot of local farmers, and I'm not talking about meat producers, I'm talking about vegetable producers, fruit producers, whole nine, cold storage. Cold storage is so difficult in this part of the country. It gets hot as heck during the summer and gets really cold in the winter, and you can't reliably store stuff year round using, traditional techniques, and those aren't really readily accepted. This can also tie into food delivery. We were talking about, how do we aggregate produce together? How do we get it inventoried and then ultimately get it to Nokonosh or somebody else to deliver it? And a great way to do this, and there's 3 or 4 locations that pop to mind, is these old grocery stores that are sitting there in limbo. They have a produce cooler, they have a dairy cooler, they have a meat cooler. More than likely, all that needs to be done is basic recharging and getting the facility running again. And you can open that space up to these producers to bring their produce to market. When they bring it to you, there's no expectation from the producer or on the producer to bring X amount. It's what they have. You bring it in and it goes into their specific store. We'll call it a store for all intents and purposes. And so the consumer could then go into the app or whatever and place an order depending on what producer they want to do, and it gets pulled out of cold storage. And you can also utilize the old retail storefronts that are already there. So by aggregating everything together, you're providing producers with cold storage, whether they're fruit, vegetable, or meat. You're providing cold storage, whether it's frozen or refrigerated. You're aggregating all of that product, giving them that opportunity to keep their product year round, and then putting it in a condensed spot that makes it easy to pick, pull, build, and ship. And I think Mike Calicrate has been doing wonderful work with Ranch Foods Direct. And I'm a little biased. I worked for the man for about 3 months and I managed his slaughter facility. But from the outside looking in, they had a team constantly working on putting together boxes, whether it was fresh produce, milk, eggs, meat. They put together these boxes and they got them out into the community, and they're able to do that because of their robust cold storage capacity and their robust inventory software.
And what was that institution?
Ranch Foods Direct.
Okay, so the 4 things I've heard is, for consumer demand, a potential branding of our approaching Colorado product by having our own regional brand, and or also, because people are going to keep eating out, working on continuing to build on this certified restaurant program. Then at the wholesale level, given we have a wholesale partner here who can make that happen, for pursuing what supports that, and then, but also for individual households, something like a delivery model plus a better market. So I feel like you have a portfolio of things that all touch on the big problems you gave us.
So there's 5.
I missed one.
No, because we didn't mention it yet. No, the thing that I think we also need to address is the large purchasing powerhouse, our institutional buyers.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
have these ginormous hospital systems represented here in the county, and schools. I know they've been having a lot of supply chain perturbations, but they've also become more, at least in other counties, I think we're a little bit behind in Larimer County, but we've got both our K through 12, our preschools, as well as our, higher ed institutions. And so, I mean, I think we've got, I don't know if the county could provide some incentives for local purchasing, but I'm part of a national project that's making those inroads with hospitals and trying to get them to purchase on a regular, consistent, year-round basis products from local growers. So
The one place that the county has control of is the jail food service.
Yeah, jail is different.
And maybe they can at least speak up and say, hey, you're gonna have to be creative. You're gonna get foods on a regular basis in jail, and you're gonna upgrade their
Reject.
But how many of the jails in the state are actual government institutions versus private
I
institutions?
think a lot of counties, county
Jails.
jails are.
And Boulder County's buying a lot of local product now. So I mean, there are examples.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Colorado Correctional.
And I bring that up because when I moved to Wyoming and was working for a processor in northern Wyoming, they tried to pursue these institutional clients. But like even the school district, it wasn't cheap enough for them. They weren't getting the funding to be able to make it worth our bottom dollar. Because at the end of the day, you still have to pay people to do the dirty work. And if you can't make your bottom dollar and meet these institutional clients, this is as much as they can pay, then where are you? Nowhere.
We heard Karen talk about some examples of those, particularly schools being subsidized. And I don't remember what the mechanism was, but there was certainly a subsidy there to the schools to, I think it was 10 cents a meal in some way, shape, or form.
So some of this goes back to her. I mean, if you have multiple qualities of food, you can start to meet multiple demands. I mean, the prisons aren't buying choice grade A meat. They shouldn't be buying choice grade A meat. But that's where you have more of a cooperative supply and you have different grades of food coming in, and a wholesaler has different grades of food going to different places. Now here, I'm on the conservation district board here. We are contemplating, we're going to merge so that we have a countywide district. We're going to probably pursue a mill levy. We have had conversations saying, hey, look, what if a conservation district owned a packing shed that provided your cold storage, that provided your cooperative type opportunity where all the members in the conservation district can, at some incentivized level, bring their food there. It's inventoried there. There's some database there that allocates that, and then a wholesaler or whatever. I mean, maybe it's not just there's probably multiple options. A wholesaler, door delivery types models, restaurant type assets can all kind of facilitate around a common location.
Like a distribution hub?
Yeah, I mean, effectively it's a packing
Like
with a distribution.
a small town co-op. That's what it comes back to, is we're working with each other instead of competing with each other.
That would be somewhat subsidized by a mill levy. So we would say, hey, like property taxpayers in this area, you're gonna have to pay a little bit of tax, and there's gonna be some, and it might.
Is there a model of that somewhere?
I have no idea. This is just brainstorming on our own. And it might pick up to the point where it doesn't need to be subsidized. In fact, there's a very strong likelihood it wouldn't need to be subsidized if you set it up and had it running correctly. But the trick is getting it up and running.
Yep.
Not one farmer or not one wholesaler or not one restaurant organization or not any one entity wants to fork out the money. Because it's not cheap. I mean, you're talking several $1 million. And that's where you get hung up. That's why like IGA has been able to do what they do, is because they've found enough farmers to work together. And I don't know if that, I mean, that's not a local thing, but it's a good model.
All right, I just want to say we've got 10 minutes left, so kind of final thoughts.
I have a quick question for you. You're president of the Berthoud Farmers Market, or on the board, or?
I'm the treasurer of Berthoud Local, and they're the organization
Okay.
that runs Berthoud Farmers Market.
What would it take to consolidate all the farmers markets in the one big location?
Or they're all very, very certain they're the right
I know
model.
that. I'm saying that there's an opportunity if you consolidate them.
There's a piece for us in Berthoud that being so far south in the county,
Right.
we have the farmer's market in Berthoud, not just to support our local farms in Berthoud, but because
Okay.
our community in Berthoud, which is growing at leaps and bounds, we are then providing that service for bringing that local food to our community instead of them having to drive up to Fort Collins for it.
I live in Loveland and it's more convenient any day of the week for me to go down to Berthoud and go buy my eggs or lamb or whatever from Kristen than it is for me to drag my sorry keister all the way up here to the courthouse and wade through the crowds. I know everybody at the Berthoud Farmers Market. It's much more convenient.
But there could be coordination.
That's true.
Week, simple
Oh, absolutely.
policies, those kinds
We
of.
actually struggle because our market's on Saturday, and I think that's the same day as the Walmart market.
Yes.
And for
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And you open, Berthoud opens later too.
Yes.
let me make a prediction in regard to getting all the farmers to work together and hold hands and form a cooperative. That is going to be very difficult.
Yes.
So in sort of closing the meeting, I heard Food Policy Council as perhaps an interest among the board. Come back to it, I think perhaps that is one other idea in addition to what Dawn mentioned, supporting farmers markets, et cetera, is formulation of a food policy council to coordinate these conversations. And to that end, Dawn briefly mentioned it, we just received a $250,000 Regional Food Systems Partnership Planning Grant from USDA in recognition of that this community needs to come together to better have these conversations. One of our explicit goals in applying for that money was to form a local food policy council. We had been thinking, I think, that it would be probably, if it was going to be within a municipality, it'd be within Fort Collins.
But we wanted it to be the food shed. I think we
It's not.
we included language that it could possibly be the northern tier and not just our county.
So what was the demise of there was a food cluster, right?
Do not.
It was.
Well, I mean,
I was on it. Don't.
I don't want to, I mean.
It was very political.
You keep recreating
Yes and no.
conversations and we don't learn from what failed, I don't know, I got invited to a meeting, but my bandwidth didn't quite go that far.
But you didn't miss anything.
Well, no, it started out with good aims, but this is the
They
problem with
started
food
out-
policy councils and why that number's going down. Then you staff up, then all the pressure to staff up and for those people to raise money to cover their salaries becomes the mission instead of the mission supposed to be. So she didn't talk about this, but you don't make, as soon as that group wanted to have more staff and then started staffing up and us on the board telling them quit staffing up because then the pressure is to make it. And then it just went belly up because we were trying to make payroll for 5 people. Well, it wasn't creating enough value or covering payroll for 5 people. So we need to get it right this time and it needs the value proposition has to come before the staff, except for one to coordinate.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a producer and I mean, they couldn't sell me on any value proposition.
No, there were none.
Exactly.
And I had a cup of coffee or two over it.
Well, I guess the question is there political and otherwise appetite for making an attempt at a local food policy council?
Well, I think so. I think there's probably an appetite for it. I just don't know from a producer's perspective, because the producers in this county have slowly steered, at least on a larger scale, not the CSA's variety, but on the larger scale, you've seen them steer away from that. I mean, the biggest example is the Grant Farms situation, right? You have a 2,000 acre farm go from local produce to commodity type farming. And so you're seeing the trend go that way. And it's not because Greg understands his economies and he understands where, the headaches he's willing to take on and the value proposition. And that one went the other way.
It was easier then for the producer, is what you're saying, Zach?
It's easier to get one check from one commodity organization than it is to try to chase down.
That's always the evolution, but we can develop infrastructure that makes that commodification still be marketed locally rather than going to the easiest route.
That's where a packing shed type thing might make some sense. I've got to flesh this out a little more. If somebody has more information about it, I mean, we'd be happy to have that conversation, but.
How does that differ from what at least they're trying to do is recovery?
We're talking about it being producer driven.
Recovery is trying to be consumer facing. They're very much at the retail end. He's talking about the middleman end, which Elizabeth covers part of. But if you look at a normal supply chain, there's usually an aggregation point that's very close to the farmer ranch level. She really took the space that's the next step to that. And then recovery and the farmers markets are very consumer facing. Usually you have all 4 of those steps in a usual chain.
I mean, we're gonna have a conversation in whatever, 3 weeks, 2 weeks about supply side stuff. I will do some, you're all invited back. We'd love to have more input on the supply side. We'll try to get some more producers here too on that, but that is a supply side conversation, honestly.
And there'll be, I think there's gonna be a couple of people from CDA.
Okay.
Tom, I think Tom's gonna come,
Lubinski, great.
and
Danielle.
Danielle, I think, head of Colorado Proud. Yeah, I think they're both gonna come. I invited them today.
Nice.
And Becca, sorry, she had to go and pick up a kiddo. But we're wrapping anyway, right?
Yeah, I'll just throw out that it'd be awesome if we could do something to support putting in poultry processing.
I knew that was gonna come up.
I think,
No, not supply, that's, oh, I guess, yeah.
I think a wonderful first step in helping Larimer County's poultry producers would be getting a countywide effort to establish some sort of mobile processing unit. I mean, in the state of Georgia, we're talking the poultry capital of the United States. There's so much poultry being produced there. But during COVID, with all the plants being shut down, there were so many producers on the small end that couldn't get their birds into processing or what have you. So
That's still happening, not even just with poultry, right? That's still happening.
oh, exactly. And I'm kind of like the person that has to deal with it. I dealt with it in retail at the beginning of COVID.
Thank you, Clyde.
And, you know, I'm still dealing with it today as a livestock harvester and as a whole carcass butcher.
So hang on, that's a bit of a supply side conversation.
I understand.
Yeah,
yin and yang.
But I want to make sure that we bring this, because your initial comments were really good about culture. Look, I mean, you go to New York City and you go to a butcher, there is one butcher in Larimer County that it's just a sole operating butcher, right?
Friendly Nicks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like our culture has devolved to the point where the consumer doesn't even know they have options.
No.
Right? Like they just go to the grocery store and whatever's wrapped in plastic is I guess what I'm gonna feed my kid.
And well, like as a retail meat cutter, I was getting boxes that I know were not packed in the state of Colorado.
For sure.
And then having my regional manager come in and say, well, why aren't all your packages, why don't they all have the little Colorado sticker up? Well, it wasn't boxed in Colorado.
Well, and I'm getting at more of a culture,
Yeah.
cultural issue. Like we don't even know you have options. Like you can go to a butcher and say, hey, I want my steaks cut like this, or I want these cut.
But meat box programs are having a record year.
Yeah.
So, because that is something that you can almost cost effectively box. So if you look at the number of households buying box beef, kind of akin to CSA's banana side, that is showing a cultural shift. But again, perhaps because of convenience, but perhaps because of, I wouldn't even know where to get the butcher box meat in my town would be, so.
So, and I mean, within the state of Colorado, there's a couple of options. I'm gonna bring up one in Colorado and one in Wyoming. One of them is vertically integrated, the other is not. Mountain Primal, they produce cattle in way out west of Denver in the mountains, but they end up hauling all of their animals to St. Francis, Kansas to have them slaughtered. And then the entity that's doing the slaughter and processing is handling all of the portion cutting and inventory for them and doing all of the pre-packing. Carter Country Meats in Wyoming, they're at the end of the Bighorn Mountains. They're vertically integrated from the get-go. So they have an old school butcher shop, the old wood counters. They can't put sawdust on the floor. If they could, they would. And they also have a processing facility that was funded by the state of Wyoming that's allowing them to process under federal inspection, vacuum pack, they're doing the whole nine, and they're doing their cold storage and shipping it out all in one go. So, we're kind of in this area where there is food here, but there are not the tools for producers to actually get their product to market. Their only options are going elsewhere.
So infrastructure.
Infrastructure is the biggest
and
one.
Alan, I think that the demand piece of that from a producer perspective is that, there's a ton of meat producers that would love to make their product available, but it's more of a barrier from a demand side. It's a barrier for the meat getting out there. It's
More processors, and there aren't those
But that's a
because.
barrier.
Well, see, but some of this is a cultural shift. See, we think that processors need to get all the way down to a vacuum package state.
No.
And that's a cultural problem, right? Like, I mean, in New York City, every block has.
I mean,
that's taking a
Fleischer's,
swing-
the Meat Hook, Prince Abu's Butchery in Manhattan.
Yeah, but
I-
they're all taking a swinging half or a swinging
Yeah.
quarter and dissecting it down. And if we could get the meat packaging or the meat processing in Larimer County to not be spending all their time vacuum packaging meat. They could slaughter a lot more critters.
Well, it doesn't,
We lost them.
so it's not so much time spent vacuum packing, it's culturally, the small butcher shop that was cutting swinging sides has been stamped out by the large grocery chains. The large grocery chains started out cutting whole sides. You could go to Safeway and they would cut from a side and pack it down and put it in the styrofoam or the paper for you. But with the advent, thanks to IBP, of cryovac beef, it's more cost effective for them to wet age and cryovac it and then send it out to the grocery stores.
Yeah, no, fair enough, but that's the culture.
That's the culture, yeah.
We're at time, guys.
Sorry.
Just to be conscious of everybody's time, and I just wanted to thank everybody for giving 2 hours of your life to us tonight. I really appreciate it. We've got a lot of, I'm so glad you guys came. The 4 of us have been talking for months, and tonight we heard things that we wouldn't have thought of on our own. So we don't have the solutions tonight. That wasn't our goal. Our goal was to hear your ideas and to talk through a lot of this stuff. So we have a lot more work to do, but we've heard a lot of great things. So for everybody online and for everybody in the room, thank you so much for coming tonight. Our next one where we're going to talk about supply is on December 9th. I'll make sure that everybody on the call gets an invitation. If you haven't already, I've been sending them out kind of piecemeal. But I'll make sure you guys get a hook into that, and we'll do the same format. You can come in person, or you can go in the comfort of your home with your helpers in the kitchen, whatever works.
Recorded this, so we recorded this, so we'll try to find a way to post this up on the county planning website, and then you can share it with some of your friends and whatnot if they want to catch up with what's going on, or provide these guys with written comments, and maybe we can get some other opportunities.
So I love what Matt just said, guys. If you do want to share this with people that can help with more ideas for demand, we would love to get more ideas, because to Kristen's point, you know, John, Beth, Kristen and I have been talking about this for months. And so, and some of the ideas that we were thinking of came up in the discussion tonight, but there were a whole lot more that we would not come up with.
Well, and one other point that I was just making to Ashley that I think is worthy of getting into the minutes is that primarily the
This is picking
discussion.
all that up.
Oh, I'm so
primarily
sorry.
The discussion has revolved around perishable product, and there is a lot of production that's non-perishable that needs to be thought about. And of course, I'm a honey producer, right? See, honey food without a shelf life, great. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people that are doing some really good products with, you know, manufacturing side of perishable products or non-perishable in the first place.
Okay.
So I'd like us to try and consider those in that context of this also.
My parting thought was one of the things that Karen brought up, and it sort of came up in here, was the discussion of having like a local brand. One of the ideas she posted was a website that kind of, they made a brand for their county, and then they put together a website and they listed their producers on there so that people who move to that county and people who are living in that county can go to that resource and find out what are the local foods that are available to them.
Well, we have Colorado agritourism.
Well, and to Kristen's point, there are too many mom and pops out there that are popping up these local directories that are such absolute garbage for any of us who are like, okay, well, great, we have to pay our $5 a year to you now. And if the county did that, that is a great suggestion. How a county.
State has one and no one uses it.
Say again?
State has one and no one uses it.
That's because it's a map and you can't do a search.
A lot of these things have been tried elsewhere and not worked. So I think it's important for us to sort of understand, like Becca ran a local distributing company in New York State that went defunct. We need to learn those lessons about why these local efforts often fail and not try to do them again. And maybe look for other solutions.
Yes.
I do think a good example of somebody who's taken multiple farmers and created a brand is Nyman Ranch. That's exactly what.
Is who?
It's called Nyman Ranch.
Yeah.
And they have over 750 independently owned farms and ranches, and they aggregate for them, and they are the brand that is sold. It isn't, Willis Farms or Johnson's Pork. It's literally Diamond Ranch because they have to meet those protocols. And so it's specific to meat, but I think there's a
No, it's
lot
like
that can be
organic value.
taken from that. What's that?
Well, every dairy cooperative in the country is that.
Yeah.
It's
that
very
model.
similar to the Colorado Land Producers Association
Totally.
and their building of that large process.
So I think when you get into that brand conversation, it's interesting because you have to have some sort of protocol or something that's tying it all together. Like if you have so many, yeah, what are the standards?
You
What
need,
are,
you need standards.
need
Diamond's got
this-
an incredible level of standards for,
otherwise the consumer doesn't understand what the brand
Right.
represents. It's like, what is this brand representing? And so I think from a marketing standpoint.
but they've also spent 15 years doing that,
Oh, yes.
you know.
Yeah, I would love that.
Right, so we can learn from it and spend 8 instead of 15.
Yes, during half the time.
Yes.
All
All right.
right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Hopefully we'll see you again on December 9th. Thank you.
You look at the artisan meat cutting.
Did you work with